In the darkness of untold stories, where truth is often scarier than fiction, we will explore together the most haunting mysteries. Welcome to 10 More Disturbing True Stories Volume 2, where every page opens a world full of strange things, tragic fates, and moments that will make you shiver. Prepare yourself, because these stories will not only touch your imagination, but will also make you unforgettable. Story 10: Ghost House Unforgettable Memories. When I was young, about 7 years old, my memories of the old house where I grew up are now only vague fragments. That house is located deep in a quiet forest, away from the noise of the city. The room I stayed in on the second floor was not a regular bedroom, but a small room attached to the attic. This room was used by the previous owner as a playroom for his daughter and always felt forgotten, like a place that had been left behind for a long time. The room has a giant closet door that leads straight to the attic. The wardrobe is higher than the floor. You have to climb a set of old wooden stairs to get inside. Every time someone steps up, the stairs creak. The closet door was a large, heavy sliding door that made an ominous sound every time it was opened. Inside, the space is dark, cold, and full of old toys. I often felt scared when I was alone in that room, where I always felt like something was wrong. One night, after the whole family watched a horror movie, I lay in bed with fear still in my heart. While I was trying to sleep, I suddenly heard a strange sound from the closet. The noise was very slight, as if something was moving inside. Then suddenly the toys fell out everywhere. The sound of Lego rolling on the wooden floor. I was startled, my heart pounding with fear, and ran straight into my parents' room. I cried and told them about what I had heard, but they just shook their heads and tried to reassure me that it was nothing. However, seeing how scared I was, my parents agreed to let me sleep in their room that night. The next night, when the fear had subsided a bit, I almost forgot about yesterday, but suddenly the sound of toys falling echoed from the closet, the dry sound of Lego pieces hitting the floor. I ran back to my parents' room and told my story. This time, my dad started to lose patience and thought I was just imagining things. However, he agreed to let me sleep in their room. The next day, my mother and I decided to check the closet. When we opened the heavy sliding door, we saw a pile of Legos lying on the floor, as if they had fallen out of their boxes. I pointed at it tremblingly, thinking it was evidence that someone had entered my closet at night. But my mother just smiled reassuringly, thinking that the toy was accidentally spilled. That night, my father decided to lock the closet door tightly so that nothing could get in or out. I lay in bed, feeling anxious and unable to sleep. Everything in the room was silent, only the moonlight shining through the window, creating eerie shadows on the walls. I lay there, listening to every little noise, waiting for something to happen. About an hour has passed. The atmosphere has become more stuffy. Suddenly, the scary sound rang out again. The cabinet door slowly opened, creaking. Moonlight shines through the window, creating a dark shadow standing next to the closet door. My heart stopped beating. I was so scared that I couldn't speak. That figure was tall, standing there quietly, just a few steps away from me. In that moment, I couldn't determine whether it was a person or something else. The shadow began to move, slowly, as if trying not to be detected by me. But when I couldn't suppress my fear anymore, I let out a shrill scream, making the whole house shake. The figure suddenly jumped down from the closet, ran quickly out of my room, rushed down the stairs, and disappeared through the front door of the house. My mother immediately rushed into my room, and my father ran down the stairs to catch the stranger. But no one found any trace of him. The police arrived and searched the entire house but found no clues. That man, or whatever it was that had been standing in my closet that night, had disappeared without a trace. Even though many years have passed, that terrifying feeling is still as clear in my memory as if it happened last night. That house, that room, and that image became a never-ending nightmare in my mind. Story 9: Piano Sound from Hell Horrifying Melody. When I was in 8th grade, the school organized a special field trip called the Louisiana Tour. This trip focuses on exploring historical sites in South Louisiana, including Myrtle Plantation, which is famous for its haunted stories. As soon as I arrived at the ancient plantation, I felt a cold and heavy atmosphere, as if this place contained deep mysteries. Myrtle Plantation is surrounded by moss-covered oak trees that look like the twisted arms of spirits. The large house with walls covered in history seems to have witnessed many horror stories. At first sight, I felt an uneasy feeling, as if something invisible was watching us. We were led into the house, and I was quickly drawn into this strange space. The rooms had been preserved almost intact from the plantation's heyday. When the tour guide started telling the history of the house, I felt like I was lost in another world where the past and present blended together in a terrifying way. I stood in a large room with my friends and other students. The tour guide was telling a story, but I couldn't concentrate. There's something strange about this room, something I can't identify. Suddenly, amidst the silence, I began to hear a strange sound, soft but clear, like a piano being played. At first, I thought I heard wrong or that the sound was just part of the tour. But as the piano continued to sound, each note humming in the quiet space, I began to feel worried. I turned my head and looked around the room, trying to find the source of the sound. However, there was no piano in the room, and the sound continued, growing clearer and clearer. I asked my friends standing nearby, but they shook their heads, saying they didn't hear anything. A cold feeling began to spread throughout my body. Something very strange is happening, and I'm the only one who feels it. The more I tried to listen, the clearer the piano sound became. I felt isolated and lost in the crowd. While everyone was listening attentively to the tour guide, I realized there was a woman standing on the other side of the room staring at me. Her eyes were different, not like everyone else's. She looked at me quizzically, and when our eyes met, she signaled that she also heard the sound. Even though I felt chills down my spine, I was also relieved to know I wasn't the only one going through this. I nodded to confirm that I also heard the piano. At that moment, the tour guide began to tell the story of a soldier who died at the plantation, who often played the piano at night and whose music was heard by many tourists from the underworld. This story gave me goosebumps, but at the same time it partly explained what I had heard. When the tour ended, I walked out of the room with the woman who shared the strange experience with me. We talked, and she confirmed that she also heard the sound, but her husband and son did not. We were both confused and couldn't understand what had happened. After that trip, I couldn't forget the strange experience at Myrtle Plantation. The sound from the piano still seems to echo in my mind, like a reminder that there are things in life that cannot be explained by science or reason. It was a dark mystery, an experience that will haunt me for the rest of my life. Story 8: Terrifying encounter on the new moon night, fear in the dark. On a chilly autumn evening, the Halloween atmosphere spread throughout our small school. Jack-o'-lanterns glowed brightly, paper ghosts dangled from the classroom ceiling, and cheerful laughter echoed throughout the hallways. We, a group of close friends, sat around in the corner of the room, telling each other ghost stories to add to the excitement. Each person has their own story, from mysterious ghosts to strange noises in the night. When it was my friend's turn, she looked hesitant, her eyes full of worry, as if she was thinking about whether to tell or not. After a moment of hesitation, she decided to start the story about her parents' first date. The story takes place on a new moon night, when the sky is only illuminated by twinkling stars. Even though it was a bit awkward, the evening still passed happily. As night fell, her father came up with a bold idea: a midnight hike up Provo Canyon, an area he was familiar with. Her mother, although a little nervous, was charmed by his confidence and agreed. They drove through the winding road, with only the car's headlights illuminating a small section ahead. The rest was dense darkness. When they arrived, they left the warmth of their cabin behind and began their journey under a starry sky. The air was cold and silent, only the sound of leaves rustling underfoot and the chirping of insects. As she entered the trail, her father began to feel a strange sense of unease. Although he couldn't explain this feeling, he clearly felt the loneliness and silence of the night forest. He tried to ignore this feeling and keep the date going smoothly. The feeling of insecurity becomes stronger and stronger. As he walked deeper into the forest, his foot touched something soft. He stopped, his heart pounding, but the light from the stars was not enough to see the object clearly. The anxiety turned into real fear, and he couldn't see the object clearly. He and her mother stood silently. No one dared to say anything. In the end, they decided to turn back, leaving behind their curiosity and unanswered fear. Years later, when they were married and had families, they watched an interview about Ted Bundy, the infamous serial killer. Bundy talked about the last time he was caught, when he lured a girl into Provo Canyon and killed her when he heard the footsteps of a couple. Bundy hid in the darkness and saw the man kicking the body of the girl he had just killed, not examining the body, but just leaving in a hurry. When my friend's parents heard this story, they realized that that night, the uncomfortable feeling and soft object her father touched was the body of an unfortunate victim. The memory of their first date becomes a horrifying experience that haunts them for life. This story will also haunt those of us who heard it, forever. Story 7: Library of Horrors, Mysterious Sounds at Midnight. My school's library is an ancient building with ivy-covered red brick walls open until 2 a.m. to accommodate students like me, who often leave studying until the last minute. Still, the place is never completely deserted. There is something dark and mysterious that covers the night. The library has 2 main floors, but the basement area, or stacks, is where most of the books and documents are stored. This is a long, dark hallway with a grand staircase leading down to 2 large rooms. The bookshelves reached all the way to the ceiling, filling the space with heavy silence. A few tables along the wall are illuminated by pale white neon lights, peeking out from the pages of old books. At around 11 p.m., I went down to the basement to finish my history research. The whole building was almost deserted, just me and a friend sitting a few tables away from me. After more than 2 hours immersed in work, I started to feel tired. Suddenly, the sound of turning pages rang out from the other side of the room. The sound was clear and strong, as if someone was angrily turning the pages of a book. At first, I thought it was just someone else working, but after a few minutes, the noise didn't stop and got louder. A feeling of anxiety overwhelmed me. I stood up, determined to find the source of the noise. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the quiet space, but when I took 3 steps, the noise suddenly stopped. I stood still, looked around, but didn't see anyone. When I returned to my seat, everything was silent again. However, only about 10 minutes later, the sound of turning pages rang out again, this time louder and more intense, as if someone was trying to take out giant books. My friend sitting a few tables away from me also started to feel uncomfortable. He stood up, searching for the source of the sound with me. We walked along the bookshelves, but although the sound clearly came from nearby, we didn't see anyone. The entrances to the stacks were all empty, and there were no signs of people entering or leaving. When we returned to our seats, we both felt nervous. I tried to convince myself that the noise was just the fan or sounds from another room, but as soon as I sat down, the sound of turning pages rang out again, this time right next to my friend's seat. Panic was evident on his face. He quickly stuffed his things into his bag and left the room without saying a word. I don't hesitate either. After he left, I left the basement, my heart pounding in my chest. From then on, I vowed never to return to the basement area at night, even if someone else was there. In the dark night and terrifying silence, that place seemed to hide inexplicable mysteries. Story 6: A terrifying trip at sea. Ghosts in the middle of the ocean. It was a trip I will never forget, a terrifying experience at sea, on a pitch-black night, with a mysterious stranger whom my wife and I encountered in the wild waters of the North Atlantic. We departed from the East Coast, heading toward the ocean for a 2-day fishing trip, hoping for some time to relax and commune with nature. The first day passed normally, with calm seas, and we caught quite a few fish. On the first night, under the starry sky, we sat playing cards and listening to music from the radio, feeling so peaceful. But on the second night, everything changed. The sea became too quiet. There was no wind, only the gentle sound of waves hitting the ship's hull. We sat down to play cards again, but didn't turn on the music. A strange and uncomfortable feeling began to take over. Suddenly, in the silence of the night, we heard the sound of a boat engine, a faint sound echoing in the still space. As we stepped out onto the deck, we saw an old motorboat approaching, without lights, just a few meters away from us. The boatman was a middle-aged man with a thick beard and a faded baseball cap. His face was hidden in darkness, making it difficult to see clearly. He stopped the boat right in front of our bow without saying a word, just standing there and staring at us. A feeling of insecurity rose within me. I approached and asked him if he needed any help. He asked in a hoarse voice if we had gas for the boat. I shook my head apologetically and said we didn't have one. However, when asked if he needed a ride because he was low on fuel, he immediately refused, saying he had plenty of gas. His answer was completely opposite to his original question, making me feel confused and worried. The silence between us grew heavier, broken only by the sound of the waves and the gentle roar of the boat's engine. The man stood there, his dark eyes staring at me, as if trying to read my thoughts. My wife stood next to me, holding my hand tightly, both of us feeling extremely nervous. Finally, the man broke the silence by asking if we had caught many fish. I tried to stay calm and replied that we also caught a few. He smiled slightly, but that smile didn't reach his eyes, just a cold curve on his lips. I asked him how he could cross this sea at night without lights. He just chuckled, a creepy laugh as if I had just told a bad joke. The man turned the boat around and walked away into the night, leaving us in uncomfortable silence. My wife whispered to me that she was afraid he was planning to rob our boat. I felt the same, But there was something more terrifying. Why did he come to us in the middle of the night, far from shore and alone in a small boat? I decided to turn off all the lights on the ship and steer a little north to make sure he couldn't find us so easily anymore. At around 2 a.m., I was awakened by my wife's terrifying scream. My heart was pounding as I jumped out of bed, only to see a figure standing at the edge of the bed. I rushed towards the intruder, but he snuck out of the cabin before I could touch him. I heard the boat's engine start outside, and that shadow plunged into the dark night again. We did not hesitate another moment. Immediately, I started the boat and brought us back to shore. We reported the incident to the police, but there was no news about the man or the old motorboat. Since that night, I still don't understand what that man wanted from us, or what he intended to do when he broke into our ship in the middle of the sea. Those images still haunt me, giving me nightmares to this day. Story 5: Black Shadow in the Room, a Nightmare with No Way Out. The room was in darkness, with only a little light coming in from outside through the curtains. The room layout is very simple. My bed faces the small alcove, but that corner is always hidden by the wardrobe, making it a dark area, receiving no light from the ceiling lights or from the outside. I lay in bed, closed my eyes, trying to sleep, but an uncomfortable feeling gradually invaded my mind, as if someone was watching me intently. That feeling became more and more clear, making my heart beat faster. I tried to understand and convince myself that it was just my imagination, but that feeling did not disappear but became stronger and clearer. Something or someone was looking at me with malicious eyes. I can't ignore this feeling anymore. In confusion and fear, I opened my eyes and looked into the darkness. My eyes were drawn to the dark corner of the room, where light never reached. There, in the dark corner, I saw a faint shadow. It was just a vague but clear shape. It stood still, as if watching me from the dark. A chill ran down my spine. I tried to tell myself that it was just an illusion. The light and darkness were playing tricks on my eyes. But I know well, that's not true. I closed my eyes, hoping that when I opened them, the shadow would be gone. But even when I closed my eyes, I could still feel that gaze, cold and cruel, as if invading my mind. I tried to forget and sleep, but the fear still wouldn't let me go. A soft, rattling sound came from the floor, causing me to stiffen. The sound was like footsteps, but very light, as if someone was moving stealthily. I opened my eyes again, my heart pounding. That shadow, it was getting closer. Now it is no longer just a faint line, but seems clearer. My senses were so tense that they were unbearable. I quickly pulled the blanket and pillow over my head, trying to shield myself from what I knew was coming closer. I trembled, tears streaming down my face, and silently prayed that the thing wouldn't come any closer. Finally, I fell asleep, but it was not a peaceful sleep. Instead, I was trapped in nightmares I couldn't wake up from. Even though I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, the cold feeling and evil eyes were still imprinted in my mind, making me shiver every time I thought about it. That quiet room was no longer a safe place like before, but a place where I felt the presence of something evil, always watching me from the darkness. Story 4: Terrifying Memories of a Camping Night, Strangers in the Dark. In mid-July, my family decided to go camping together for the first time. I was 18 years old, and my brother and sister, 11-year-old twins, were excited and nervous as we headed out of the city and into the wild countryside. Although he didn't arrive at an official campsite, my father parked the car on the side of a quiet road, and the family headed deep into the woods, away from all traces of humans. We walked about a mile into the woods, where there was no one but silence and darkness. Finally, we found a small clearing where the sunlight couldn't reach. Here we set up 2 tents, one for me and my siblings, and one for my parents. When night falls, thick darkness covers everything and the forest comes alive with the cries of night creatures. I crawled into my sleeping bag and tried to close my eyes to sleep, but the uncomfortable feeling kept bothering me. The ground was hard and cold, making it impossible for me to find a comfortable position. When my siblings and I fell asleep, I still tossed and turned, trying to soothe myself to sleep. Suddenly, the gentle sound of the tent zip echoing in the quiet space. I immediately opened my eyes, my breath caught in my throat. A head poked into the tent. The darkness obscured it, so I couldn't recognize who it was. I tried to stay calm, thinking it might be Mom or Dad checking on us, but the awkward, heavy silence felt wrong. That person said nothing, just stood there looking into the tent. Feelings of insecurity surged. I whispered a question but received no response. The person's head slowly retracted and I heard footsteps quickly leaving the tent, the zipper still open. My heart started pounding in my chest and I knew I had to get it checked out. I crawled out of my sleeping bag and walked lightly but quickly towards my parents' tent. When I unzipped their tent and crawled inside, I saw my parents still lying in their sleeping bags, unaware. I shook my father awake, filled with fear. When Dad woke up, I quickly asked, did he check on us? My father was still sleepy and shook his head to say no. A chill ran down my spine when I heard that answer. I woke my mother up, but she also shook her head, affirming that she had not left the tent. My fear increased tenfold when I realized that a stranger had approached our tent, unzipped it, and looked inside. I don't know who it is and don't dare to think about their purpose. That cold and scary feeling haunted me all night, not letting me sleep for even a minute. Every little sound, every chirp of the insects out there is like a warning of the presence of a stranger in the dark. To this day, the memory of that night still makes me shudder every time I think about it. A haunting image that I cannot erase. Story 3: The Mysterious Painter Traces of the Soul. During my parents' honeymoon in Key West, they chose a hotel to enjoy their time together. Upon check-in, they were informed that their room was a non-smoking room. Because my father is a smoker, he was dissatisfied and asked to change rooms immediately. Hotel staff quickly moved them to another room upstairs, and they took the elevator to their new room. When the elevator stopped and the doors opened, my parents were enveloped by the strong smell of new paint. The hallway was filled with such a chemical smell that it made them feel uncomfortable. Along the hallway, they saw a painter working intently with a paint bucket, brushes, and floor coverings around him. Although my parents tried to greet them, the artist seemed completely unaware of their presence, did not raise his head or respond. When entering the new room, the smell of paint was even stronger than in the hallway. The room was stuffy, which made my parents decide to go back to the front desk to request another room change. The receptionist appeared confused upon hearing their story, stating that there was no painting scheduled that day on that floor. Still, she agreed to change rooms without asking any questions. My parents went back to the previous floor to get their luggage. When he arrived at the hallway where the artist had been working just 10 minutes before, everything was gone. The paint box, tools, and canvas were all gone. What's even more strange is that the previous strong smell of paint has completely disappeared. The air is as fresh as if no one had ever worked there. The sudden and comprehensive change made my parents feel cold and insecure. Even though they felt confused and scared, my parents didn't want to think too much about it and quickly moved to a new room, trying to leave the strange things behind. They told themselves maybe it was just a misunderstanding or confusion about the artist's schedule. The next morning, when they went down to the lobby for breakfast, they overheard a group of tourists listening to the tour guide tell them about the hotel's history. When the tour guide started telling about an event that happened many years ago, my parents listened with curiosity. They heard that many years ago, an artist worked on the floor where they used to live. While painting the hallway, he had an accident and fell into the elevator shaft and died on the spot. This story left my parents dumbfounded. The image of the artist from last night immediately appearing in their minds, his silhouette, his tools, and his mysterious presence. Even though my parents are not people who believe in the paranormal, after that incident they couldn't explain it rationally. The fear and coldness from that story still cling to them, making them feel insecure about what they have experienced. Even though they try to forget, the memory of the mysterious artist and the empty hallway still haunts them. Story 2: The Mysterious Painter Traces of the Soul. The story I'm about to tell haunted me for a long time, even though it didn't happen to me but to my cousin Nikki. Every time I think about it, I feel chills and indescribable fear. One ordinary Friday night, Nikki was chatting with her girlfriend Sam over Skype. At 1 a.m., they were still passionately chatting. Sam invited Nikki to stay the night, but Nikki refused because she didn't want to drive late at night. Everything seemed normal until Nikki noticed something strange. The closet door behind Sam, which was closed, was now slightly open, creating a small gap. Nikki pointed toward the closet door and informed Sam. Sam looked back, laughed, and assumed it was just the wind. They continued chatting, trying to ignore the anomaly. But about half an hour later, Nikki saw the closet door open a little wider, making a light click sound. Nikki felt worried and asked Sam if her brother was hiding in the closet. Sam insisted she was home alone. Although nervous, Nikki tried to calm herself. As the conversation continued, the closet door slowly opened wider. Nikki was horrified to see a figure step out of the closet, calmly walk across the room and disappear from the webcam's view. Sam didn't seem to notice anything and continued chatting. Nikki panicked, asked Sam to lock the door and call the police immediately. Sam sensed the seriousness of the situation and ran to the door. But it was too late. The stranger was standing right in front of the door, looking at her with cold eyes. Sam screams, slamming the door and locking it, while Nikki urges her to call the police. Nikki immediately called the police and drove to Sam's house as quickly as possible. On the way, he kept calling Sam, but there was no response. When he arrived, Sam's front door was still open, but inside it was eerily silent. Nikki ran into the house, calling Sam's name, but no one answered. The police arrive and break down Sam's bedroom door. The scene inside sent chills down everyone's spine. Sam sat huddled in the corner of the room, shaking and so shocked that he couldn't speak. When they asked, Sam only said that someone was standing right in front of her, staring through the crack in the door before she could close it. Although the police searched the surrounding area, they found no trace of the stranger. This story makes my whole family shudder every time it is mentioned, and Nikki will never forget the terrifying eyes she saw on the screen that night. Story 1: Strange Faces in the Storm. Terror from outside. That night, the storm raged violently with rumbling thunder and torrential rain. I sat watching movies all night, and even after watching Forrest Gump for the 100th time, I still couldn't take my eyes off the screen. As it approached 2 a.m., I decided it was time to go to bed. I really liked the feeling of lying in my room during a storm. The sound of the storm seemed to make everything more interesting. As I lay under the blanket, the wind howling outside and thunder tearing across the sky, I suddenly heard a strange sound. Something hit the window. It wasn't the sound of rain falling, but a clear collision. During the fierce storm, I didn't think much about it and tried to go back to sleep. But a few seconds later, the noise came again. Something hit the window again. I glued my eyes to the bed curtain, my heart beating faster. It couldn't have been my dad, because he would call if anything happened. Another rock hit the window, and now I was completely scared. I didn't want to look out the window, but I knew that the light from the TV in my room could attract the attention of anyone outside. I told myself that if I ignored them, they might go away. But immediately another rock hit the window, and the rain began to stop, making the atmosphere even quieter and more scary. I heard the truck engine barreling down the road, an unmistakably loud sound. I quickly got out of bed and was about to call the police. As I ran down the stairs toward the phone, I walked through the front door and saw something through the glass on the door. It was a human face looking into the house, with a strange smile on its lips. I felt my heart stop beating. Panic made me unable to think of anything other than running to the kitchen and calling the police. I informed the police that someone was trying to break into the house and emphasized the need for urgent assistance. They said there was an officer nearby and would be there shortly. While I was calling, the person outside started twisting the door handle and trying to open it. I quickly grabbed a knife from the kitchen to defend myself, shouted that the police were coming, and ran back to my room. The pounding on the door had stopped. No more rocks were hitting the window. I didn't dare look outside, afraid that something or someone was lurking out there. The sound of the truck rolling and disappearing in the rain increased the feeling of tension. A moment later, I heard police sirens and the doorbell ring. I opened the door for the policeman and explained everything. I described the face I saw through the window, but unfortunately I couldn't provide more information about the truck because I couldn't see it clearly. I regret not searching faster, feeling like I missed the opportunity to provide information that could have helped the police catch the fearmonger. I don't know what their intentions were to rob the house or worse, but the memory of that night still makes me tremble every time I think about it. And as the final pages of 10 More Disturbing True Stories Volume 2 close, take a moment to reflect on what you just experienced. These stories are not only pieces of fear, but also lessons about the darkness in the human soul. Don't let the light of day erase those haunting images. Keep them in your mind as a reminder that sometimes the truth is scarier than we imagine. See you on your next journeys into the world of horror.